There we go. All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're at in the world. Thank you all for showing up to today's workshop. This is part one of what I call Shatter the Silence. This is in support of Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. All month of April, many different organizations and people are out there spreading the word, sharing their stories, and doing their part in hoping to, what I like to call, again, shatter the silence so that survivors all over the globe have the courage and have a safe space to be able to tell their stories, but also to find healing in our world today. But the other part that a lot of people don't really focus on is not only the prevention piece, but the healing piece, right? We want to encourage everybody to share their stories, but it's not just about sharing their story, it's also about the healing process. So sharing your story is just one step to that. There's so many other things that you can do to literally heal your heart from any type of sexual trauma that you have gone through in your life. If you can hear the noise in the background, I have my headphones on, but I can hear the noise. I'm not sure if you can, but it's my granddaughter's birthday and all her little friends are here. So they're out there having a good time while I'm in the room. So I just wanted you guys to know that. Well, anyways, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Darlene Garcia. I am an advanced grief recovery specialist and a wellness coach. But really why I'm out here and doing this is mostly because I have a story. I was sexually assaulted at the age of 12, and some of you may know my story, and I'll be telling bits and pieces of it as we go through the presentation. But I'm able to share my story because I have definitely come to a place of healing. But listen, you guys, it took me over 30 years to get to that place. Most of my life, I have learned to mask, to suppress what happened to me, and to do some very unhealthy things in my life because of what happened to me. And so my whole purpose of doing these workshops is to give people that have suffered from sexual assault a place to not only share their story, but to know that there are ways that you can heal your heart and that you don't have to live with a nightmare for the rest of your life. Okay, so here we go. So I always like to start off with a disclaimer every time I do any type of workshop that talks about grief, loss, trauma. And that's because a lot of people might think that I'm some sort of doctor or clinician, and I'm not. I am an advanced grief recovery specialist and a wellness coach. So I'm not a licensed clinician, such as a psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist, or counselor. The tips and tools that I will be sharing with you, are not guaranteed to take away your pain. Your active participation in your own healing is what will give you results. And over the course of the 4 workshops that I'll be doing this month, you will learn different ways that you can give yourself grace and practice self-care through your process of your healing journey, whatever action steps you're going to take to embark on that. I also like to set the tone, to set the stage for safety. I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things that might make you uncomfortable. And also, I will be talking about a lot of things that maybe you might not have heard it from this perspective. So there are some commitments that I would like for all of us to make so that we can provide a safe space for everybody as we go through this presentation tonight. The first one is to have an open mind. Again, as a grief recovery specialist and a health coach or wellness coach, I don't have methodologies like clinicians and doctors or mental health professionals. I come from a very holistic and action-based or educational-based type of methodologies. And so sometimes it's very different from what you may have heard from a therapist or a counselor. So I just want you to keep an open mind as you participate in these workshops. The next one is to be emotionally honest. And even though your cameras are probably going to stay off the entire time, which is perfectly okay, I want you to be emotionally honest with yourself. So as I talk about things and you start to feel a certain way, just allow those feelings to process and flow through you. I also ask that we don't judge each other, but most especially don't judge yourself, right? I'm going to say this a lot throughout our presentation, that if you are a sexual assault survivor, that it was not your fault, right? So please don't judge yourself through this journey. The other one is don't compare. There are many different types of sexual assaults out there. Some maybe you've never even heard of before. Some that are you may think are a lot worse than maybe what you went through. So I always ask people, please don't compare what you've gone through with someone else, especially if you think that what you've gone through may not be as bad as what someone else has gone through, especially if someone's going to be sharing their story. I remember when this happened to me, I compared myself to many other people that had gone through different types of sexual assault in their life. Mine was what they call non-consensual sexual contact, right? It was a man that had touched me and it lasted maybe a minute or two, the entire event, but it left me traumatized for most of my life and definitely my entire teenage life. And so when we compare our losses or our traumas or situations in our life with other people, or even with situations that have happened in our own lives and they're different situations, when we compare them, we tend to minimize how we feel. So I want you to know that everything that you feel, all those feelings should be felt at 100%. So it doesn't matter what type of assault or abuse you've gone through in your life, that's yours to feel. Doesn't matter what anyone else went through, right? No one else is going to understand the depth of your pain but you, okay? The other one is to be human. You know, if you feel the tears coming, allow them to flow. Don't let them stay right here in your throat and keep swallowing them down. It's one of the worst things that you can do for yourself as you're going through your healing journey. Some technical things, please, if you are going to be sharing a story, maybe later on, I ask that you silence your devices, but also just so that you can really pay attention to the workshop. As I go through this, I want to be very mindful of your time tonight, and I also want to give an opportunity to those of you that want to share or ask questions at the end. And so I'm going to breeze right through this presentation. And if you've got any questions or you want me to repeat something at the end, you can certainly ask that at the end, or you can type it in the chat and I'll jump into those questions in the chat at the very end. I also ask that you just stay muted during the presentation. This will allow me to just flow freely through it without any interruptions. And again, feel free at the very end if you want to ask questions or type your questions in the chat throughout the presentation. And then lastly, just be respectful of others as we maybe start to interact right towards the end of the presentation. So that is the commitments that I'm going to ask everyone to make. If you are willing to make these commitments, please put a 1 in the chat so that I know that you're willing to make these commitments with me. Can you all hear me? Everyone can hear me, right? I just want to make sure everyone can hear me here. Yes, okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into the subject at hand. So we're here to talk about sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, right? A subject that is definitely not a comfortable one to talk about. And it certainly took me a long time to talk about this and more personally to talk about my story. So I want to start off with just kind of setting the tone for what exactly is sexual violence, because there's so much out there that can be considered sexual violence or sexual assault. So I'm going to talk about some of the more familiar ones to people, and then there might be some in there that, wow, I didn't know that that was sexual violence, because you may have your own story. It's probably why you're here. But when I bring up some of these other ones, you may think, oh my gosh, I know someone that has gone through something like that. They probably didn't know that it was considered sexual assault or sexual violence, okay? So here we go. The first one, sexual assault, at the top of that list, we all know is rape, right? Attempted rape is also sexual assault. So even if the perpetrator didn't complete the deed that he or she set out to do. Attempted rape can still leave a survivor, a victim, feeling very, very distraught and traumatized in their life. Fondling or unwanted sexual touching is also sexual assault. So forcing a victim to perform sexual acts such as oral sex or penetrating the perpetrator's body, all of that is sexual assault. One of the ones that is very near and dear to my heart, of course, because I was a child when this happened to me, right? Child sexual abuse. So child sexual abuse is a form of child abuse that includes sexual activity with a minor. And that, I just want to make it very clear that a child cannot consent to any form of sexual activity, period. Okay, I'm going to repeat that again. A child cannot consent to any form of sexual activity, period. When a perpetrator engages with a child this way, they are committing a crime. Okay, they can have lasting effects on the victim for years, right? Remember, it took me over 30 years to talk about my story. And before I could talk about it, I first had to heal. So I sat with it for that long. Imagine I was 12 years old and I was in my mid 40s, I believe, when I literally was able to get some help and to take the action steps to heal my heart from what had happened to me. Child sexual abuse does not need to include physical contact between a perpetrator and the minor. It could be, things like having them take off their clothes in front of them, or the adult stripping in front of the child and forcing the child to watch them. That's child sexual abuse. Okay. So there's many forms of child sexual abuse, and it's a lot. I'm going to talk about that more in depth in part 2, which is going to be next week. Incest, the term incest refers to sexual contact between family members. I will also be touching on this one more in depth next week. There are laws that vary from state to state regarding what constitutes crimes of incest, child sexual abuse, sexual assault, and rape. But regardless of what the state laws are, any child that goes through this with a family member leaves a lasting effect on that child all the way up into their adult life. When I started sharing my story, I should say maybe even before that, we see this in the news all the time, about different adults coming forward in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s, and talking about how they were sexually assaulted by their grandfather, by their uncle, by their dad, by their brother, by their cousin, right? It took them so long to have the courage to come forward and tell these stories. And I'll talk about that a lot more and why, right? Why that happens in our society today. I realize that this is a very delicate topic, but definitely one that cannot be ignored. And so very heartbreaking, but something that I will definitely talk about in depth next week. Sexual abuse of people with disabilities. This one always breaks my heart. I just can't imagine why anyone would want to take advantage of someone that has a disability that can't, maybe speak or hear or be mobile in certain parts of their body and take advantage of them in this way. And to be honest, people with disabilities are victimized by all types of crimes at higher rates than the rest of the population, right? And obviously why? Because they've got a disability, they cannot protect themselves. And so, there's some sort of sick and twisted power that perpetrators have over abusing people with a disability. Sexual harassment includes unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature in the workplace or in a learning environment, such as a school or university. I will be covering this topic in more detail in workshop number 3, the third week. Prisoner rape is another one that maybe we don't hear about too often, right? Why? Because people that are incarcerated, they don't really talk about what happens inside the prison. My late husband was a correction officer, so it's one of the reasons that I put this on here. You know, I've heard many stories that he shared with me, you know, when he was alive and a correction officer, and it's really sad what people will do to others and take advantage of them. Even a prisoner is a human being, right? Is a human being, and it's apples and oranges. So regardless of what they did to get themselves in jail, being raped inside prison shouldn't have anything to do with what happened or what crime they committed. But it happens every single day inside our prisons around the nation. And then military sexual trauma. This is another one that's near and dear to my heart. I have brothers, I have a son, I have a sister, I have nephews, I have cousins. I have lots of family members that are in the military. I'm very fortunate that I've not heard of any of my family members that have suffered from sexual trauma while being in the military, but I definitely have had clients that have come through my programs because of what they have suffered in the military. So military sexual trauma is probably one of those that are not talked about very often, and also one of those that are kept silent by the survivor for many reasons, right? And one of them is honoring their military code for whatever reason. And so they hold on to that a lot of times until after they get out of the military. And sometimes that could be many, many years after. And I will also be touching on this on the third week. So next week, just to kind of give you guys an idea, I'll be talking about child sexual abuse and incest. And then in the third week, I'll be talking about sexual harassment and military sexual trauma. So here's a few more faces of sexual violence: date rape, intimate partner sexual assault. I know a lot of these ones, a lot of the stories that are out there, you know, people believe that because you're in a relationship that it's not really considered sexual assault, and that's not true. We'll talk about some of those myths as we go through the presentation. Voyeurism, right? Voyeurism is when, you know, someone is watching you in the act of having sex. Degrading sexual imagery, right? Just maybe someone showing nude pictures of you, right? That's sexual violence against you, especially if you didn't give them permission to do that. Indecent exposure. Gosh, I remember being a cheerleader when I was about 12, not 12, 10 years old, about 10 years old, and walking to practice. There was a bunch of us girls walking together. I'm glad I wasn't by myself, but there was literally a man parked on the side of the road in his car, playing with himself, and got our attention. And when we saw what he was doing, we literally ran. So things like that people will do. Cyber harassment. We live in the digital era, and so cyber harassment is increasing all the time, every single day. It increases. And so just because you are not physically around someone does not mean that it doesn't, it can't be considered sexual violence. So cyber harassment is definitely considered sexual violence depending on what is happening online. And then non-consensual sexual contact. This is exactly what happened to me. You know, a man decided to stick his hand inside the window of my car when I was waiting for my mom at a store, and touched me in my private parts and watched me freak out and run out on the driver's side because he was on my side, and watched me the whole time. You know, it was the most eerie, the most scary 1 to 2 minutes that I've ever experienced in my entire life. And I was shamed and I was disgusted. And I lost a lot of trust in men of my race because I thought that they were all like that, and had a lot of different feelings and losses that I dealt with for my entire teenage life. And when I met my husband, he made me feel safe. And so I was able to put that away for a while. But believe me, it came up a lot. And if you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, you would have read my story because I shared pieces of it over the last several days. So, but yeah, so these are some of the many faces of sexual violence. It's not all of it. And you know, maybe you have a story around sexual violence that I didn't bring up here in the slides, and that's okay. Don't think that yours wasn't sexual violence just because I didn't bring it up. Like I said, there's so many out there, and I put the ones here in the presentation that are very common out there that people would know about. So let's talk about some of the stigmas and the myths around sexual assaults. Okay, the first one: rape, molestation, and sexual assault are rare, or they only happen to a certain type of person. That's a stigma, or that's a myth. Sexual assault is very common and can happen to anyone. Guys, the statistics for 2021 are very troubling. Every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. And every 9 minutes, that victim is a child. Meanwhile, only 25 out of every 1,000 perpetrators will end up in prison. That was data that I had gotten from the RAIN organization. RAIN stands for Rape, Assault, and Incest National Network. And you can look them up online. Those statistics are right on there. And when I saw that, I was so blown away. I couldn't believe how often this still happens in our world today. Number two, if a person didn't verbally say no, it doesn't count as rape. Definitely a myth. Consent is not the absence of no. It is the presence of an informed and freely given yes. No is a complete sentence, really, at the end of the day. You know, I brought up date rape or intimate partner rape or assault, right? Even people that are in marriages can suffer rape within their own relationships, right? Just because you're married, just because you're in a relationship does not give a person the right to have sex with you anytime they want. If you're not in the mood to have sex, if you don't want to do it, you can absolutely say no. If you're in the middle of, you know, getting intimate and now you've changed your mind and you don't want to do it and your partner continues to persist and does it anyway, no, that's not right. That isn't right. Okay. Number three, boys and men can't be raped and women can't be perpetrators. Another big myth out there. Boys and men can be raped and women definitely can be perpetrators or rapists. The statistics out there are actually very alarming. I was going to share that in one of my posts in the coming days, but it actually shows that boys are more sexually assaulted. The number of boys out there versus girls are more sexually assaulted by the time they turn 18 than girls, which I found to be very, very crazy. I didn't realize that. Number four, a person can prevent sexual assault with certain behaviors such as avoiding strangers or never walking home alone. Another big myth. Most people are likely to know the person that assaulted them, right? Talked about incest, family members. It's huge. Where I'm from, my culture, It's huge in the islands, and it's very sad. But most people know their perpetrator. Okay, so you can take the biggest precaution by making sure you're not walking by yourself, right? Staying in public areas. But we always put our guard down when we're among family and friends and think that everybody's safe. But the truth is, they're not always. Number 5, false rape and sexual assault reports are common. That's not true, actually. A lot of survivors, a lot of victims they fear the negative attention and stigma that causes people to underreport sexual assault, right? You heard the data, right? 25 out of 1,000 will go to jail. That's because they go unreported, right? Because survivors a lot of times are ashamed, a lot of times feel judged, think people are not going to believe them, and so they just deal with it, right? Does false rape happen? Very, very minimal. It does, but it's not very common, okay? Number 6, if a rape really happened, the victim would report it immediately. Again, that is so not true, right? Victims will delay reporting for many different reasons. They know the person that did it to them. Maybe they were threatened by that person, right? If you tell, I will kill you, or I will kill your family, or I will hurt your family, or I will come after you, or just even if they were a stranger, right? They could still come after you. And so there's many reasons why a victim won't report it immediately. A lot of times it's trauma, shock, right? Did that really happen to me? What do I do? Do I report it? I mean, we don't learn these things, right? Growing up, most of us don't. We don't learn how to defend ourselves or what to do when something like this happens. Most of the time we're backpedaling or trying to put out a fire, right? When we wait until something like this actually happens to us or happens to someone we know versus preparing ourselves in advance, so we know what to do, right? So most victims, most survivors are initially in shock, and are shamed and have no idea who to turn to, where to go. Loss of trust is almost immediate when something like this happens to a person, okay? Rape, number 7, rape has to be very violent or involve a weapon to count. Again, so not true. Rape can be coercive or occur under the influence of alcohol and drugs, but simply because a rape could have been worse does not mean that a rape doesn't count, okay? So it does not have to be very violent or involve a weapon to count. And again, whose opinion is it about being violent? Any type of sexual assault or sexual abuse is violent to the victim, right? It's violent, right? The degree or the level of violence doesn't even matter. It's wrong, okay? And it's traumatizing. Number 8, it is impossible to get pregnant from rape. Not true. A woman is just as likely to get pregnant from rape as she is from consensual intercourse. I have a friend that she has a beautiful daughter. She's an adult today, and her daughter is a product of rape, right? So yeah, you definitely can get pregnant from a rape. Number 8, it is impossible. Number 9, only vaginal penetration counts as sexual assault. You heard what I talked about in the many faces of sexual assault, many forms of it. Does not have to include vaginal penetration, fondling, touching, naked people in front of you, having sex in front of you. Anything that you perceive to be violent is sexual assault, okay? And number 10, it's not sexual assault or rape if the assailant and victim are already in a relationship. I talked about that a little bit earlier, right? Intimate partner rape. That is a very real thing, very underreported, but it's a very real thing, right? Again, no one has a right to sex. No one has a right to sex, guys. Romantic status and prior consent do not erase the need for current consent, okay? You need consent every single time before you have sex. So let's talk about the challenges that sexual assault survivors face, right? Every sexual assault survivor story is different, and how each survivor deals with their experience are incredibly personal. Sadly, though, there are too many reasons why survivors keep their sexual assault a secret. The burden of holding such a traumatic event in silence can pose a lifetime of emotional turbulence as well as mental and physical complications. So let's look at what are some of these things that prevent survivors from speaking up. Why is it such a challenge? The first one, fear of retaliation or punishment from the perpetrator. I mentioned this just a little while ago, right? If you know the person, they could already threaten you and tell you, don't tell. A lot of times, if it's a child, they're manipulated. It's just a game. Nobody needs to know. It's our little secret, right? And the child doesn't know any better. And they'll live in fear because the adult is more powerful, much bigger than them, right? Fear of victim blaming, right? I remember when I was in court and I was asked questions, like, oh, what were you wearing? Why were your legs up on the dashboard? Why was your car unlocked? Your window down? Why didn't you go to the store with your mom? Why would anyone ask me those type of questions? Still beyond me. It still blows my mind. But a lot of victims are asked those questions by the cops, by the attorneys. It's crazy. But it puts a person in this place of thinking, is it my fault? Did I do this? Right? Because other people are blaming you. Imagine if it was a family member, right, that did this to you. We're going to talk a lot about that in depth next week, but there's so much victim blaming that goes on when the perpetrator is part of your family or a family friend. Fear that they won't be believed, right? There is a lot of that going on, whether it's in the workplace or the person that assaulted you is very recognized, very respected in the community. No one's going to believe me. They're going to believe him or her over me because he's famous, he's popular, he's respected, right? So the fear of not being believed. Fear they will have no support or a place to turn for help, right? Remember what I said earlier, almost immediately when someone is assaulted, they lose that sense of trust by everybody, by everyone, right? Even those closest to you, because some of the questions that are asked almost right away can leave you wondering, like, I don't know if I can trust you anymore. Fear of being shunned. Right? How many times have you been ignored or lost friends or family because of what happened to you? Right? That's a real thing that sexual assault survivors face. People are uncomfortable. They don't know how to deal with trauma. They don't know how to deal with loss and grief. And so they stay away for a while until they see that you're better. How do I know this? Not just from what happened to me, but when I lost my husband, it's the same similar situation. Grief is everything that someone faces when they've lost something, right? When I lost him, I was very dark and very emotional, and people didn't know how to deal with my grief, right? So when someone is suffering from a sexual assault, the traumatic event will bring on feelings of grief, and most people in society don't know how to deal with that, so they will stay away. being conditioned by the perpetrator to keep silent. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, right? Especially if it's a child, they will be manipulated to not say anything. And then blaming themselves for the sexual assault. Too many times, people will sit and ask themselves, what could I have done to make him do that to me? What did I do? Could I have done something different? Did I say something? Did I flirt? Did I wear the wrong clothes? Did I give him some sort of signal to tell him that it was okay to touch me? And we start blaming ourselves, right? So these are just some of the challenges the sexual assault survivors face. You may have different ones that I didn't put up here. And I would be so honored to know your story, whether you want to share it here in the presence of others, or if you and I just chatted one-on-one. But there could be other ones, and I'd love to know what that is so that I can make sure that I can be a voice for many of you that are not ready to have a voice yet. Okay. So I'm going to breeze through these ones really quickly because we're going to go into this one in depth next week. But this is a very real situation that happens all around the globe, but it's very near and dear to my heart because things like this do happen, unfortunately, in my family. So why family members side with sexual abusers, right? Living with the emotional effects of sexual abuse is already painful enough, right? It's already painful. But unfortunately, many survivors open up about their abuse only to find that their family members' reactions toward them are either just as painful or more painful than the original trauma. When you tell a family member that this is what happened to you and it was done by another family member and the reaction that you get is not what you expected, it can hurt so much more. So much more. Right? So let's talk about why this happens within family members. Right? The perpetrator is, again, known to you, a family member, a close family member, a grandparent, a father, brother, an uncle, always someone really, really close in the family that you would never believe would do this. No one in the family would ever believe they would do this. What is the initial reaction? Shock. Everyone's shocked. No way. Impossible. There's no way he could have done that. He's the sweetest man, right? They're traumatized too, right? No excuse, but they're traumatized too. It's one of the things that I teach my clients as we go through the grief recovery method, that what someone goes through with a loss event, with a traumatic event that they've gone through in their life, it affects everyone around you, but you all deal with it differently, right? We're all unique in how we deal with things. But when sexual assault happens within the family, the ripple effect of trauma is huge. It's huge. Family members are ashamed, right? They're ashamed. They can't believe that this is happening in their family. Go down to just really quickly cultural beliefs, right? Where I'm from, right? It's embarrassing. Like, don't embarrass the family name. So we're just going to sweep it under the carpet and we're not going to talk about it. We will deal with it within our family. No one else needs to know, right? There's also fear, right? When you think about who could possibly have done this, it could be, someone that is, an elder in the family, right? That is very well respected and just feared in general, right? Maybe a grandfather who, has this very stern, very strong personality that everyone respects him, but not always respect out of respect, but respect out of fear, right? And so the fear will translate also into what happens if this grandfather hurt a niece or nephew, right? Everyone in the family is like, I'm not going to go up against him. Are you going to go up against him? So everyone's scared, right? So cultural beliefs around the globe will vary, but generalization, pretty similar. It's not easy for anyone to fathom that a family member will do this to another family member, yet it happens every single day around the globe. Religious beliefs is another reason that family members side with sexual abusers. We need to forgive. God says that we have to forgive, so we have to forgive. Never mind about how I feel. I just got to forgive, because that's what God wants. Right? So religious beliefs are thrown into the mix because of what else are you going to fall back on when something like this happens in your family? Give it up to God, right? Isn't that what we're told? If you've got really hardcore religious beliefs in your family, sometimes that's what we're going to default to. And then, of course, family beliefs, and those all intermingle with the cultural and the religious beliefs, right? But each family is different. Each family is different. But I can tell you guys the many stories that have been shared with me by women and men. When it's a family member, it can break up a family forever. We'll talk about this a lot more in depth next week when we talk about child sexual abuse. So now I want to go into what happens to our bodies when we suffer from trauma. It affects our emotional health, our physical health, and our mental health. Right? Keeping silent about sexual assault can compound the existing emotional, psychological issues from the assault alone. Survivors of sexual assault may experience the following difficulties, but again, everyone's situation is unique to them, and how they respond or react will also differ from person to person. Okay, so I just want you to remember our commitments in the beginning that I talked about, with no comparing and no judging. Give yourself grace as I go through some of these, because you might be looking at this going, oh my God, that's me, right? It's okay. Okay, it's okay. So let's talk about emotional health. The first one, overwhelming feelings of hopelessness and unhappiness. How can I ever be happy again? This man took away my innocence. He destroyed my youth. He made me scared and put up this wall with everyone and everything. How can I ever be happy again? Lose all hope of joy and having a good quality of life. It's overwhelming. Constantly feeling worried or scared. Can they see it on my face? Do they know that I was raped? The scars, the pain. It's not like a physical pain where you can put a Band-Aid over it and people can see that you're going through this. It's the type of internal bleeding that can happen for years, right? You're constantly scared of someone else going to do this to you, or if the person that did this to you has not gone to jail yet, are they going to come after me again? I'm worried. I don't know how to act. I don't want to scare my mom or my dad or my family. I don't want them to think that I'm going crazy, even though I feel like I am. I'm worried. I'm worried for my family and scared for their life. If I say anything, he'll come after them. Emotional outbursts and anger, right? How many times do we just put up this wall and everything that everyone says to us irritates us, right? And we have these outbursts, angry at everything, at everyone. Don't know how to act anymore. Feeling moody, anxious, or sad, right? Constantly fidgeting. Can't get it out of your head. It's constantly affecting you every single day of your life. Feeling overwhelmed or irritable, right? Sometimes, even if we're not thinking about it, maybe we've learned to suppress it, but everything else around us irritates us or overwhelms us. That's what happens when we suppress human emotions. Everything else we're going to feel, because those emotions that we have not processed through yet are stuffed inside of us. Talk about how that affects the physical body. Right? Sleeping too much or not getting enough sleep. Some people will want to sleep all day because then that is less hours in the day that they have to think about it. Others cannot get it out of their head and can't go to bed, right? Or they're left alone at night in the dark by themselves with their thoughts constantly going through their mind, right? And what happens when you sleep too much or you don't get enough sleep? You lack energy. But guys, feelings are emotional energy. And so when we keep them stuffed up inside of us, it takes energy to do that. And so we're lacking energy in general. Change in appetite. A lot of times when someone suffers from a sexual assault, the pain is held right in the tummy, right in their stomach. And a lot of the feelings that you're having is disgust, right? Scared, overwhelmed, confused. Who wants to eat after all of that, right? So change in appetite. But then there's the opposite of that. Some will eat and eat and eat because food is comfort. Food is comfort. I shared a story or a testimonial in one of my Facebook posts about a woman who decided that she was going to put on a lot of weight because when she lost all that weight was when she got raped. And so she thought that if she stayed fat, then no one would want to rape her. And so she just kept eating and put on weight. That was her protection mechanism. Increased headaches, nausea, or chest pain. Again, holding your human emotions inside of you, it needs to come up, right? And so sometimes when it's so stuffed up, we're holding it right here, we get sick, or it comes up to our head. Some people hold their emotions in their head, they get constant headaches, or you're constantly panicked, having anxiety, you get those chest pains, right? So all of those human emotions that are inside of you, it is making all of your organs inside your body work in overdrive. And so you're going to experience these physical conditions inside of you because the energy, the emotional energy that you keep stuffed up is keeping you in what we call fight or flight mode. And then the last one, heightened sensitivity to certain noises or smells. Again, this is the trigger from a traumatic event, right? Someone that suffers from PTSD, for example, that went out to war. I had my best friend's husband, before he died, he suffered from severe PTSD, and any noise that sounded like it was a bomb or whatever would totally set him off and freak him out, and he'd want to hide, right? This is some of the effects of what happens when you have gone through a traumatic event, right? So depending on what you heard when your sexual assault happened, those noises could trigger, right? So you're heightened, you're alert, you're always listening for those noises to make sure that you protect yourself from that ever happening again. Smells also, right? If there was a certain scent that you smell that you remember at the time of your assault, you're looking out for that smell to make sure that you stay far away from it. You walk away from it and not towards it, right? And so a lot of times your sensitivity, your senses are heightened as a protection mechanism to make sure that you don't go through this again. Okay. So that's the physical health. Now let's talk about the mental health. Right? The brain is the most powerful organ in our body. It is where everything gets recorded. Everything that we feel, our senses, gets recorded, even if we don't really think about it too much. So for example, I teach this in grief recovery at the youngest age, right? When we're a toddler, even when when we're first born, when we're babies, our senses already, we can smell, sense of touch, mommy, right? Warm around you, things like that. Um, our brain is constantly recording that. And so we're going to remember these things, right? And so that constant recording in our brain that's where our behaviors and our belief system and our character is built and formed through our brain, right? So mental health is very much affected by what happens when we go and suffer from a traumatic event. So the first one, uncontrolled overthinking, right? Again, some of those questions that were asked by some of you maybe when you went through your sexual assault and you were questioned by whether it was family members or the police or an attorney, depending on how far, your experience went with the law. And so you're constantly thinking about these things. And even if you try and suppress these memories, some people are really good at doing that. Some are not, right? And will continuously think about it. Fixating on past failures and self-blame, like constantly thinking about what could I have done different? What could I have done better? What could I have done more? Having intrusive thoughts about the event, right? Again, just can't get it out of your mind. It constantly haunts you all the time. Having flashbacks of the event, right? Getting easily startled. All of these things can affect a sexual assault victim. And then what can that lead to? It can lead to someone self-harming. Remember that pain is pain, but physical pain versus emotional pain are very different. Emotional pain, you can't just put a band-aid on it. You can't just take um, a painkiller and it'll go away like physical pain will, right? So a lot of times people will self-harm. They'll cut, they'll pull their hair, they'll do things, right? Punch a wall, break their wrist because the physical pain feels better than the emotional pain. Thoughts of suicide, attempted suicide, and even following through with suicide is very real with sexual assault victims, right? Especially if they've held on to it for so many years. Some people will say, well, over time it gets better. No, it doesn't. A lot of times for sexual assault victims, it gets worse and worse, worse and worse, right? And because that traumatic event that happened in their life is not going to be the last, there's going to be other things. And so event after event after event gets compounded on top of each other. And then you start to experience more and more. And just, you can never get a break, right? You can never get a break. And so sometimes people will get to that point where suicide feels like the only option, the only option. Okay, so emotional, physical, and mental health is greatly impacted by sexual assault victims and will continue to affect you if you do not get help to heal from that trauma. It will not get better, guys. It'll just get worse and worse. Now, I found this graphic online, as I was doing some research, and it's a picture that I would use a lot in my grief recovery programs. It's an iceberg, right? So this is an iceberg that you see here, and you see the person in the water swimming, just kind of like floating above the water, right? It's like you feel like you're drowning. The analogy of the iceberg is that it goes deep down into the depths, right, of the earth. And only the parts that are on the top are what people can see. And so that analogy is like someone who suffers from trauma. There's only so much that the world can see about what's happening to you. But what's really going on inside is beneath the surface. Beneath the surface, right? So sometimes, depending on how you react in front of others, you can be perceived as, or people will see you as annoying, always sad, always crying, a problematic person, always getting angry. But what's really going on underneath, guys? What's going on? You're scared, you have low self-esteem, you're having nightmares, you're having stomach aches, you want to hurt yourself, you're feeling guilty, you're reliving the trauma, having flashbacks, paranoia. Right? You isolate yourself because nobody gets it. Can't sleep. You know? I don't know if this is how some of you feel, but I'll tell you that when it comes to any type of traumatic event, this is what most people will talk about and say that my pain runs so deep, I couldn't even describe it to you how I feel, because it's all beneath the surface. So that is our presentation for today. Next week, we're going to talk about child sexual violence, and that's going to include also incest, right? What happens within families. Same time, same day, next week, okay? So guys, if you know anyone that has suffered from some sort of sexual assault in their life, whether it happened many years ago or something recent, I want to ask you to please invite them to come next week. Also, if you know someone that has children, young children, they're going to want to come to next week's workshop, because I'm going to talk about the signs. I want for parents to know that in order to protect your children, you need to know the signs. You need to know how to talk to your children. You need to know the right questions to ask them. Like, let's not wait until something actually happens. Let's protect our kids by teaching them how to protect themselves. We're going to talk a lot about that next week. If you know someone that is a teacher, a counselor, a coach, daycare provider, anyone that takes care of children, they also will want to come next week, okay? Because they are probably around the kids most of the day, and so they'll see the signs probably more. Maybe the kids might even feel safer talking to them than talking to their parents, because their perpetrator, their assailant, sex offender is within their family, right? So teachers and counselors and coaches, they might be the safe person, right? So you also need to recognize those signs. All right, guys. So before we go into story sharing, I just, this is a graphic that I use a lot in my grief recovery workshops. This depicts what we like to call in grief recovery as a heart with ears. And a heart with ears means that we just listen without judgment, without comparing, without offering advice. We hold space for the person that is sharing their story. So I'm going to ask every one of you that are on this call today to please be a heart with ears for those that are willing, that have the courage today to share a little bit about their story. Okay, so one last thing, I just want to come back to the commitments in the beginning. If you're going to share your story, I'm going to ask you to please just be emotionally honest, right? A lot of times when we're telling stories, we want to tell every specific detail, and we go here and we talk about the intellectual parts of it. Let's talk about our feelings. Let's talk about how we actually felt at the time that it happened, because feeling words are one of those things that we have such a hard time sometimes grasping what it is that we're actually feeling. So we want to practice that so that we know how to acknowledge and allow feelings to process through us, right? And as people are sharing their story, please remember, don't compare. Their story may seem like it might be worse than yours, or maybe not even as bad as yours. It doesn't even matter. Everybody's story is unique, and everything that you feel is felt at 100%, right? We don't judge. We want everybody to just be human, be compassionate, be kind. Okay. So now I am going to stop the recording first of all. Let's do that.